Íslendingar settu fljótt svip á bæjarlífið í Winnipeg sem upphaflega var lítilfjörlegur bær en óx mjög þegar járnbrautirnar fóru að opna slétturnar miklu. Þeir bjuggu fyrst í Shantytown eða Hreysaborg, svo Point Douglas eða Pontuglas, en síðar voru íslensk hverfi í Vestend þar sem heitir Sargent and Victor. En fyrst var það Shantytown á mótum Rauðár og Assiniboine-ár.
Stefan, this huge museum of human rights, it's right on the place where Shantytown stood. What was Shantytown?
Shantytown was the first immigrant community west of Toronto in Canada. It was a community populated by Icelanders who settled here and built wooden shanties, one side of a roof, very simple wooden structure. And they built it with scrap lumber that was available to them and created this unique little neighborhood.
Okay, but they didn't stay there for very long, did they?
They were only there for 3 or 4 years before they really started to prosper and moved on to better housing up on Point Douglas.
So this really was a sort of a slum?
It wasn't exactly a slum because it was too new to be a slum, but it was certainly very humble housing. It was more humble than the turf huts they left behind.
And you have an idea for a monument for the Icelanders that might stand here with the...
I would love to see a monument right next to the Human Rights Museum that had a turf house blending into a western prairie shanty with a ship's mast coming up through the middle, which would echo both the image of the museum itself, but also the experience of the Icelanders who came here.
Good idea.
Fæstir vitaða nú orðið að í Winnipeg var tíma blómlegri íslensk menning en í heimalandinu sjálfu. Blaðaútgáfa var mjög fjörleg, helstu blöðin voru Heimskringla og Lögberg og þóttu betri en blöðin á Íslandi. Þarna störfuðu beittustu blaðamenn samtíðarinnar, Gestur Pálsson, Einar Kvaran og Jón Ólafsson, en Margrét J. Benediktsson barðist fyrir kvenréttindum og gaf út kvenréttindablaðið Freyju. Í Winnipeg voru skeið gefnar út fleiri ljóðabækur og skáldsögur á íslensku en í gamla landinu. Þaðan komu framfarir og nýjar hugmyndir. Til dæmis voru það Vestur-Íslendingar sem kenndu Íslendingum að ísa og frysta fisk. En það var fleira sem Íslendingar fluttu með sér frá Íslandi en bókmenntir. Þeir lögðust fljótt í miklar deilur trúmál. Baráttan sálirnar var hörð, þetta var tími ólíkra trúarhreyfinga, trúboða og tjaldbúðasöfnuða. Það má reyndar spyrja hvort sé eitthvað í reynslu innflytjanda sem veldur því að þeir verða leitandi í trúnni. En hjá Vestur-Íslendingum eins og hinnar endalausu trúarbragðadeilur hafi komið í staðinn fyrir pólitíkina. Virðist sannast þar að Íslendingar séu frekar þrasgjörn þjóð og að tilefnin þurfi ekki alltaf að vera mikil þegar þarf að fá útrás fyrir þrasið. Þetta orti vestur-íslenska skáldið Káinn. Þetta ekki þjóðrækni og þaðan síður guðrækni, heldur íslensk heiftrækni og helvítis bölvuð langrækni.
So this is the Exchange District, pride and glory of Winnipeg.
A wonderful historic neighborhood that shows the architecture of the 1880s through to about the 1920s.
And they even come and shoot movies here.
They shoot movies here, we have parties here, festivals.
Well, people are always talking of Gimli and New Iceland, but of course this was the largest conglomeration of Icelanders anywhere in the Western Hemisphere.
That's true. This was the largest urban concentration of Icelanders anywhere in the world, including Iceland, up until after the First World War. So this was a place of great culture and community activities. There were Icelandic newspapers here, tremendous Icelandic book publishing industry here. It really was a cultural center for Icelanders on both sides of the ocean.
And then, of course, you had the religion. Why were they always fighting about religion here?
Oh, it was an old tradition. Before the Icelanders had even unpacked their belongings, they were fighting about religion up near Gimli. And then the disputes continued for a period of time afterwards. I think it was a consequence of people coming from a country with a state church, arriving in a new land, counting on the church as a primary cultural institution for the community, and discovering that how religion was expressed in the new society was very different from what they knew at home.
And of course, you are a Unitarian priest, and
Yes.
you were fighting with the Lutherans, and the Lutherans were fighting with you.
And the Unitarian movement actually began to emerge at the first Lutheran Synod, when the Icelandic Lutheran Synod was organized in Manitoba. The minority party argued for women to have a more important role in the church, and they argued for the name to not bear the doctrinal name Lutheran, but simply be called the Icelandic Church in America or the Icelandic Christian Church in America. And they lost that argument at the founding of the Synod. And then the party that found itself as a minority over the next 5 years or so established a separate church.
The Unitarians are very liberal, right?
Very liberal. Some would say too liberal, although we're proud of it.
And then you were fighting with the Lutherans were fighting with you, and
they were fighting with us. They were fighting with other religious groups who were trying to evangelize the Icelandic community and convert the Lutherans to Christianity, since some of the Methodists, Presbyterians, and Baptists didn't even think of Lutherans as Christians.
It all sounds a bit complicated.
It's very complicated.
Winnipeg mikil fjölþjóðaborg. Þangað koma nýjar og nýjar bylgjur innflytjanda. Í franska hverfinu stytt af Louis Riel. Hann var leiðtogi metísa sem voru afkomendur franskra loðdýrakaupmanna og indjánakvenna. Riel gerði uppreisn gegn hinum bresku yfirvöldum og var gert út 5.000 manna herlið gegn honum. Nöfn Íslendinga sem tóku þátt í herförinni voru birt í blöðum. Þar á meðal var Jón Júlíus, bróðir skáldsins Káins. Þótti þetta hinn mesta frægðar för. Sveitir metísa voru sigraðar við þorpið Bathos í Saskatchewan og Riel var hengdur.
Stefan, this is a brilliant statue of Louis Riel. He was a controversial figure, and they ultimately hung him by the neck.
That's right. He was also the father of Manitoba, so that without his influence, Manitoba would not have become a province. So he's a complicated figure. And the curious thing to me is that, you know, he was a great Métis leader of the half-breed community.
The half-breed French Indian,
although he also had a following among the Scots Indian people as well.
But ultimately, they raised an army to get him.
Well, there were two rebellions. There was the first uprising here in Red River, which led to the creation of Manitoba. And then 15 years later, he led a second rebellion in Saskatchewan. And that's what did him in. He was accused of treason for leading that rebellion, and that's why he was ultimately hung.
This reminds us of the waves of immigration. First you have the Indians, and then you have the French, some of them mingling with the Indians, and then you have the English and the Scots and the Icelanders.
And then the Icelanders and the German Mennonites arrive as the first ethnic immigrants to the prairies. Yeah. And in some ways that second rebellion in Saskatchewan, the Northwest Rebellion, helped to establish the Icelanders' status here because they signed up for the military to serve the crown in putting down the uprising.
So some of the Icelanders actually went in this campaign armed, fighting the Indians, the French Indians.
That's right, to preserve Canadian sovereignty over the Canadian prairies.
But actually you don't use the word Indian in Canada, you say...
Well, we say Aboriginal people, sometimes we also say First Nations people, since they were the first nations who were here.
That's more polite.
Yes.
The monument and the statue, they're a brilliant piece of work, but it shows a twisted man.
Yes, he was a tormented figure, largely as a consequence of his being both the founder of Manitoba and as a consequence of the way that the federal government treated him in failing to recognize his role in the creation of Manitoba, and his sincerity about making Manitoba a robust province within Canada.
Well, here in Winnipeg, you have the largest population of First Nation people anywhere.
That's correct. They're a major part of the life of the city, and many of us are proud of the fact that Winnipeg is essentially the capital of Native people in Canada.
But they are not doing all too well, and that is a long, sad story.
Many suffer in considerable poverty. There are great social problems that plague the Aboriginal people in Canada, and we struggle to find solutions, but many solutions have evaded us so far.
So this is Point Douglas. Used to be an Icelandic neighborhood.
It was one of the primary Icelandic neighborhoods in the city from about 1880 until the turn of the century.
And it's right on the river here.
It leads into the river, yes.
Yeah. But there were quite a many blocks of houses where Icelanders lived.
Oh, there were probably a dozen blocks of Icelanders along this part of the city.
Okay. And your mother used to work here?
My mother did. She worked at the end of the street. This became Winnipeg's red light district, and my mother was in the auto parts industry, not the red light business. But whenever she would take the streetcar to work, the streetcar driver would call out this street and only this street when they arrived, and all the passengers would watch the women getting off the bus.
Okay, so it became a neighborhood of ill repute.
That's right.
And it's a bit run down.
It is a bit run down, and of course it became a neighborhood of ill repute as the Icelanders were leaving it.
Það var mikil gróska í íslenskum bókmenntum vestanhafs. Fram til aldamótanna 1900 kom út á þriðja tug ljóðabóka og 25 skáldsögur. Þarna voru höfundar eins og Jóhann Magnús Bjarnason sem gaf út fyrstu ljóðabókina 1887. Torfhildur Hólm sem ritaði þar sínar fyrstu sögulegu skáldsögur. Guttormur J. Guttormsson, Stefan G. Stefansson og sú sem gat sér mesta frægð meðal enskumælandi fólks. Laura Goodman Salversen, ættuð úr Bolungarvík.
This house here was the home of Laura Goodman Salversen.
She was born in this tiny little house. Her father worked for the railway, and so she was born here in 1890 when the house was just 8 years old.
But who was she?
Laura Goodman Salversen was the most significant Icelandic author in North America. She wrote in the English language. She was the first Icelander to achieve fame as an author in the English language. And she wrote many award-winning books.
But the Icelanders criticized her for writing in English.
Many people were very angry with her. They thought that she was revealing the secrets of the Icelandic community to the English-speaking world by writing in English. And they felt that she was, less than loyal to the Icelandic language itself.
But was she writing about Icelanders and the Icelandic
She was writing about Icelandic themes. So her the first book that she won a Governor General's Medal for was The Viking Heart, which was the story of the Icelandic immigrants told as fiction. And a later book was Confessions of an Immigrant's Daughter, which was a memoir of her life as an Icelandic immigrant girl.
This is where she grew up?
Yes, indeed. She visited the public library near here when she was very young, walked in, learned that she could borrow books just by presenting a card, and the first time she visited the library, she decided she was going to be an author.
Við erum komin á slóðir Sir William Stevenson, þess íslensks manns sem hefur haft mest áhrif á gang sögunar. Hann var fæddur í Point Douglas hverfinu 1896, fór á vígveldina í fyrri heimsstyrjöld, var fyrir gaseitrun, lærði að fljúga, varð flugkappi, skaut niður 20 þýskar flugvélar en þurfti svo að kasta sér út úr fallhlíf á þýsku svæði og var settur í fangabúðir Þjóðverja.
So this is the house of the master spy, intrepid.
Sir William Stevenson, arguably the most important Icelander of the 20th century.
Okay, but not many people know him really.
No, he was, in many ways, a somewhat hidden figure. He had to keep much of his story secret in order to be effective as a spy.
Yes. But what did he grew up here? And he was half Icelandic.
He grew up here. He was half Icelandic. He was born the son of William Stanger, an Orkneyman, and Sarah Guðfinna Jónsdóttir, an Icelandic woman in the city. And when he was very young, his father died, and his mother put him up for adoption. So he was adopted by Vigfús Stefánsson and his wife Christina, who lived in this house on Syndicate Street, and spent his boyhood here.
And he spoke Icelandic.
He spoke Icelandic, although the Stefánsson family was one that was assimilating into the larger society, so it was a clearly bilingual household.
But he had enormous influence during the war and after the war.
He was crucial during the war. He was Sir Winston Churchill's primary informant in the years leading up to Churchill becoming the Prime Minister of Britain. And then Churchill appointed him to head the spy agency in New York City under the guise of being a British passport office.
Yeah. And what did he sort of control from there?
He served as an intermediary between Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt in the White House. He also set to work to crack the Nazi code and was an important figure in deciphering what the Nazi code was and allowing us to understand the messages of Hitler's government.
But he has been named as the original James Bond.
Yes. And Ian Fleming, the author of James Bond, suggested that William Stevenson was one of the influences, although he wasn't the playboy figure that James Bond was. He was simply a master spy. It's said that he could move in and out of a room without being noticed by people, which seems to me to be, very good quality for a spy.
He was a mercurial character.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And he flitted about. He was also very popular. People who met him were charmed by him. The Icelandic women who worked for him were charmed by him, and he commanded their loyalty.
So he had Icelandic women working for him?
He did indeed. He recruited women from the Interlake region of Manitoba to work in his office in New York.
Líf William Stevenson hefur alltaf verið hulið leyndarhjúp. Hann varð mjög auðugur maður, en því var ekki haldið á lofti að hann væri af íslenskum ættum.
He was a brilliant man. He attended the University of Manitoba, where he invented the capacity to transmit wire photos and to even do wireless transmission of photos for the newspaper industry. Two inventions that made him an incredibly wealthy man.
But he's always been quite a puzzle, really, sort of writing books about him, but people don't seem to know very much about him.
The earliest biographies of William Stevenson might be described as tissues of lies. They were written in such a way as to maintain his cover. He knew a great many secrets, in some ways knew more than Prime Minister Churchill did about certain issues, and he needed to maintain his cover. So they fabricated a story about his origins to help build his credibility and to help maintain the secrets for decades after the war.
And being an Icelander from a humble home was not a part of that.
It was not a part of the story. They actually hid the fact that he was ethnic from the larger society. So he was believed by many to simply be part of the British majority here in Canada.
But this is where he lived.
This is his humble home.
Það ekki hægt að gera þætti Íslendinga í Vesturheimi án þess að fjalla vínartertuna. Sagt að hún ætti að vera í skjaldarmerki Vestur-Íslendinga. Vínartertan alvörumál, hvort hún 6 eða 7 laga og hvaða krem á henni. Sumstaðar raunar ekkert íslenskt eftir nema þessi kaka. Okkur boðið í kaffiboð hjá Johannu Wilson, sem hefur í áratugi verið í forystu í Jóns Sigurðssonar-deildinni af kvenfélaginu Imperial Order of the Daughters of the Empire og tók við því hlutverki af móður sinni.
They don't make it at home this good. How many layers is this one?
6.
This is 6. It's from 5 to 7. They got it from the amma. You're always talking about amma, the amma. It's really a word that lives on.
Vínarterta á boðstólum en líka kleinur og flatkökur og allt borið fram í dýrlegu mávastelli eins og á betra heimili á Íslandi.
There's another thing that strikes me, that you have a beautiful mávastell. This is the finest I can imagine in my that.
Every time I went to Iceland, I'd get a bit more. So I have the dinner set. But I started out with 1 cup and saucer.
This is the best Wienerkerta in the whole of New Iceland.
This is a corner that I call my fjallkona corner because it shows the dress and the ladies who have been honored by being made the fjallkona. Here is my mother, fjallkona 1943. Here I am 17 years ago. And these are all pictures taken of fjallkona.
And then you have a book?
And I have a book that tells about each one of the fjallkona that has been photographed over the years, right up to the year that Vigdis came, I think, which was in 89.
89.
So I've been asking them to update it because, of course, we have so many more lovely ladies that should be photographed.
So, Johanna, I would like you to tell me about your grandparents who came over from Iceland.
Yes. Well, my grandparents were in the first group that came first of all to Kinmount. And then after a very bad time there, they came to Gimli.
This was a group that suffered a lot.
And they came with 2 children. And the little girl died 10 days after they arrived because the housing condition was very bad. They were actually heading for Riverton, but a storm came up, and this boat that was towing them was in danger of capsizing. So they landed near Gimli and on this barge, and then the men, like my grandfather, helped to tow the barge to shore. My grandmother was a midwife and delivered a baby in a tent on the shore.
So she delivered the first baby?
The first baby. And there's a cairn near Gimli that shows the name of that baby on the rock, near Willow Point it's called. And every year in October, there's a walk to the rock in honor of the landing of the first settlers.
But your grandfather, he became ill from the
Yes,
airport.
he became ill because he was one of the strong men to tow the barge. And so by the time he was ready to pick his land, he didn't get a very good choice. And my grandmother walked to Winnipeg to find work. And then they had enough money to put a roof on the house they were building. So they did spend their first years, and that's where my mother was born, in the bush, near Gimli.
So now we come to the First World War, and your father was a soldier?
He was a paymaster, a captain, and he had in his battalion a number of Icelandic men. These are the officers, and there is my father.
Yes, okay.
And in this picture, this is a picture of the whole battalion. So when the war was over, these were the tributes to my father by people here in Winnipeg. This one is signed by Thorstein Borgford, Fredrik Svensson, and Gerard Rockwalder Peterson. And you would be able to tell me what it says.
Yes. Til Captain J.P. Skaftason, kæri vinur og félagsbönd.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, velkomin heim af heljarslóð yfirforingi J.B.S. Captain.
Þegar hermennirnir kom úr stríðinu voru það konur úr kvenfélaginu sem sáum að taka á móti þeim. Þar á meðal var móðir Johanna Wilson.
When my mother started the chapter, the main focus was to provide comforts for the soldiers.
Yes.
And by the time the war was over, there were 150 members in the chapter.
But a lot of Icelanders went to the
Yes,
battlefields, and
yes.
a lot of them got killed.
Yes, and actually that was really the focus and probably the most rewarding thing that the chapter did, was to prepare this book with all the soldiers' pictures and bibliographies, so that now it's very important to the families to have this record of the soldiers.
It's a touching book.
And they worked day in, day out preparing this book, going over bibliographies and finding out where they came from in Iceland and what they did in the war.
Okay.
And they had a dinner to celebrate after the war, and they had some of the soldiers who had been wounded and anyone that had lost a husband was sent a dozen roses, and this was at the Royal Hallak Hotel.
Yes.
And they did the same thing after the Second World War.
Okay.
And there it was another 700 people.
Við kveðjum eftir þetta góða boð, en vinur okkar Vestur-íslenskur sem með í för segist ekki hafa séð jafn margar og glæsilegar fjallkonur á einum stað og þarna. Fyrir framan þinghús Manitoba-fylkis stendur stytta af Jóni Sigurðssyni. Hann þar ásamt Viktoríu drottningu sem var þjóðhöfðingi Kanada á tíma vesturferðana. Það hefur verið sagt Jón að hann sé svolítið vandræðalegur á svipinn, líkt og hann veit ekki alveg hvað hann að gera þarna.
So here outside the Manitoba Parliament, we have Queen Victoria, and then we have Jón Sigurðsson. Why is he here?
Well, the Icelandic community was such an integral part of Winnipeg. It's been an incredible part of the fabric of this community for years. And when the community approached the legislature to have the statue erected here, they were more than happy to accommodate that over 90 years ago. So it's a very important gathering point for the Icelandic community as well on Iceland's Independence Day when they do come and celebrate Jón Sigurðsson.
You have Jón Sigurðsson Day.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, I had the privilege of seconding the bill that was introduced in the legislature to acknowledge Jón Sigurðsson Day, and June 17th is forever in statute as being identified as Jón Sigurðsson Day here in Manitoba. I couldn't introduce it because I'm a minister of the Crown, and as a private member's resolution, my colleague Tom Navakshinov from the Interlake, where he has, of course, Arborg and Riverton at the time as part of his community, he was the mover of the bill. I seconded it, we debated it and passed it in our legislature and declared it actually on Jón Sigurðsson Day 2 years ago.
Well, it's good that you have an umbrella, because in Iceland we connect Jón Sigurðsson with umbrellas and rain. But you can do the Jón Sigurðsson thing for me.
Oh yes, in the chamber, when we have a standing vote in our legislative assembly, I pay tribute to Jón Sigurðsson by standing in my place to vote, and I grab onto my lapels.
Okay.
And that is my homage to Jón Sigurðsson. I've always admired his political career and what I've read of him as a politician, and the fact that he used a well-researched and a very balanced argument to eventually win the day and lay the foundation for Iceland's independence.
And this works?
Well, every vote I stand in the chamber and I hold on to my lapels, and that is my homage. Indeed, I do that every single vote.
Í næsta þætti höldum við áfram að skoða okkur í Winnipeg. Við förum í gömlu íslensku hverfin á Sargent og Victor, en kvikmyndagerðamaðurinn Guy Maddin sýnir okkur hvernig á að drekka íslenskt mólakaffi.